Tre Johnson, future superstar at the 40 acres, dazzled last night in Houston, Texas in the McDonald's All American Game. The future does look bright for this basketball team at the 40 acres under Signee Tre.
You are Locked On Longhorns, your daily podcast on the Texas Longhorns. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked On Longhorns, the show. Jonathan Davis, your host. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. On today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, we discuss the future outlook based on what we know now, right? It's still super early on April 3rd for this 2024 basketball team, but also the future superstar at the 40 acres, Tre Johnson, and his amazing performance last night in the McDonald's All American Game in his home state of Texas. And then the Texas baseball team, 3 straight victories, 2 of those victories by 10 plus runs or more. So they're starting to hit on all cylinders, still giving up some runs in terms of pitching, but 3 straight wins by a run differential of over 20 plus is really, really good. We discuss all of that and more on today's episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I would say that last basketball season was somewhat of a disappointment, right? Especially coming off the Elite Eight finish the year before. I think that this Texas basketball program definitely, kind of became a victim of their own success, right? Because they created their own expectations in 2023 based on what they did in 2022, right? Because in most situations, a first-year coach, especially with the resume Signee Tre had up until this point, you wouldn't have Sweet 16 plus expectations for him, especially at a university like Texas, who doesn't have a rich basketball history, right? But based on what he did in 2022 and what he had coming back, people were like, okay, go ahead and follow it up. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to do so. But I do think this team reached their ceiling, right? I think that, this was one of the 32 best teams in the country. I don't think they were one of the best 16 teams in the country, and they made the round of 32. Now, they could have made the Sweet 16, right? Anything could happen in a single elimination tournament once you get there, which is why it's kind of hard to base coaches' success off of the tournament or use that as the only barometer. But when Kendall Weaver is your leading scorer or tied to be your leading scorer in 2 games in the tournament with Dylan Dessou, and when Kendall Weaver outscores Max Abmas in 2 games in the NCAA tournament, it makes sense why they did not make the Sweet 16, right? So I think that in that game, if Dylan Dessou and Max Abmas shot better, they played well enough to get to the Sweet 16, but they weren't one of the 16 best teams in the country, right? And so I think overall this season was a disappointment, but I've been honest and came on here and said, I just don't think that we had the guys, right? And I don't think we had the roster to be a top 16 team in the country or seriously compete for a national championship, whether we got past Tennessee or not. Now, coming into this season, I can't guarantee that they'll get past the round of 32. I can't guarantee that they'll win more because, as I've said, it's a single elimination tournament and anything can happen. But what I can guarantee is that this basketball season in 2024 going into the SEC should be a lot more exciting than what we just witnessed this previous basketball season at the University of Texas in our last year in the Big 12. And I think the biggest reason for that is the incoming freshman class that we have headlined by Tre Johnson, right? And when you look at it, Texas has not had a player of Tre Johnson's talent level at the guard position or the wing position since Kevin Durant, right? Like Texas has put a lot of big men in the league, especially under Shaka Smart. We've had some really good transfers at the guard position under Chris Beard and Signee Tre. But in terms of a top 5 to top 10 level NBA draft pick, a top 5 player at the guard position in his class, who is described as possibly the best pure scorer in his class. We have not had that type of player at the 40 acres since Kevin Durant himself, right? So regardless of what we accomplish at the end of the season next year, I think Texas basketball fans should be able to enjoy the ride and understand that we have one of the best players in the country, a future NBA player, a future high-level NBA player at the 40 acres for next season, even if it's only for next season. Talking about Tre Johnson, of course, and this is what he has been described as, right? Just recently over the last week or so and last night after his performance in the McDonald's All American Game. Been described as possibly the best pure scorer in his class. He's been described as the best scorer to come to the 40 acres since Kevin Durant. He's also been described as the best shooter in this 2024 recruiting class, even though he's ranked as the 4th or 5th best player. And I was texting Steven Ngati from Fanatic Perspective this morning. I know a bunch of y'all are subscribed to him on YouTube, and this is what he said about him. He said he was very, very efficient with his movement to score, no wasted dribbles or bad footwork. Everything he did in the game had purpose and decisiveness. Very encouraging performance. So like I said, for Texas basketball fans, it'll be a treat to watch a future high-level NBA player at the 40 acres next year, right? Even if he's only here for 1 year, and regardless of how much success they have in the tournament, right? Remember, Kevin Durant never got past the second round of the NCAA tournament, but you can't tell me that year at the University of Texas, when Kevin Durant was in that 35 jersey with the burnt orange, that wasn't one of your favorite years to watch this program. So like I said, we can't judge next year by what happens in the tournament. Obviously, you want to get as far as you can, but we just have to learn to enjoy next year, period, because we're going to have one of the best players in the country on campus, and it's going to be a treat to watch. Now, I know a lot of people are concerned about Tre Johnson and whether he's going to actually be at the 40 acres, especially, with the PTSD that comes from Ron Holland and AJ Johnson's decisions last summer. I'll say that the difference between Ron Holland and Tre Johnson, they're both from Texas, and they both played and dominated in the All American game, and then reaffirmed their commitment to Signee Tre around that time, right? But I'll say the difference is that Ron Holland went on to the G League Ignite program, the program that has put Jalen Green in the league, Scoot Henderson in the league, Ron Holland eventually in the league, allowing them to forego college. That program or that team is no longer available anymore. So that's one less option for Tre Johnson. And most people around him don't see him going overseas to play basketball for a year and skipping college. And also, I know that Ron Holland reaffirmed his commitment to, Signee Tre before he ultimately decided to decommit as well. But Tre Johnson was quoted yesterday saying the change in leadership to Signee Tre gave him a lot of confidence in this program. And I'm reading into it a little bit. He didn't say this, but you remember Baylor and Texas were his 2 top schools. And Baylor actually had the lead for Tre Johnson for a long time, right? Like, especially going into his commitment. Most people thought that he would end up going to Baylor. It kind of went to Texas at the last minute. That could be an NIL thing. But I do think that if Chris Beard was still the coach at the University of Texas, based on what he said in this press conference, there is a chance that Tre Johnson is at Baylor right now, right? He spoke about how there was a positive change in the leadership at the University of Texas, and that gave him confidence in the program. So just a special player, a special person, and somebody that could potentially take this Texas program to the next level. Last night, Tre had 19 points, making 5 of 7 threes from a very comfortable distance. We're talking about NBA range threes, right? So that's not going to be a problem in terms of his three-point shooting in college. And we know that we weren't a very good three-point shooting team last year, so he instantly upgrades that from your primary guard position. He had a putback dunk under the rim, right? Not charging towards the rim, not driving, right? He was standing under the rim, got a rebound with one hand and put it back in terms of a tomahawk dunk. And then he had a turnaround mid-range jumper off the dribble, right? And so just literal definition of a 3-level scorer. He showed it in this game. Mid-range, putback dunks under the rim. And then, of course, making 5 of 7 threes, has great feel and court vision, and can be a great playmaker in terms of passing, getting his teammates involved, reading the defense and making the right read based on how he's guarded. A high-level defender and competitor. He can get in your face and play that Signee Tre style of defense that we saw in that Elite 8 run and we saw when we were at our best last year. And then NBA level athleticism, right? You're not the 4th or 5th best prospect in a recruiting class without having the athleticism to play in the National Basketball Association. So he's going to be a boy against men, right? Based on the way that college basketball is set up nowadays with so many 5th and 6th year players, but he's going to be a man amongst boys in terms of his talent level next year, an NBA level player going against future accountants in college basketball, and he'll be wearing Texas across his jersey when he does it. And when you look at it, you got Tre Johnson, who obviously will be your number 1 player next year. You have Cam Scott, who has been the Gatorade National Player of the Year in South Carolina the last 2 years, a top 35 recruit, a point guard, I would say a guard/wing that can do a little bit of everything. He's going to be a really valuable bench piece for you next year and should be a really good player for you for 2 to 3 years at the 40 acres before he ends up in the National Basketball Association. Nick Cody, I think a top 60 to 70 player at the power forward position, really does most of his work close to the basket, but I think he's a really good developmental piece for you for the next few years at the 40 acres. Obviously, we saw what Kendall Weaver was able to do last year, and I think that he can step into that 8 to 10 points per game role while still giving you all the winning plays he did on defense and the hustle plays. Caden Shedrick is coming back for his 6th year. I think he showed some offensive flashes, obviously a really good rebounder and a really good rim protector around the rim. And I think in a bigger role, right, where he's not, just spelling minutes for Dylan Dessou, he could provide a bigger role for this basketball team, but ultimately he'll be a really good rim protector and the anchor of your defense. And then you have Devon Pryor and Zarik Onyema. Not sure what their roles will be next year. Not sure if they'll enter the portal, but they could be depth for this basketball team. And then you have Tyrese Hunter and Dylan Mitchell, 2 players who I believe should come back to the 40 acres, 2 players who still could use a ton of development. Tyrese Hunter just in terms of learning his feel for the game and how to be an effective guard night in and night out, right? And then Dylan Mitchell, still, even though he improved a lot in terms of points per game and rebounds per game, still, I think, needs to show NBA executives that he can pop out, away from the basket and knock down a consistent shot or be a threat to score outside of the restricted area. So not sure if Tyrese Hunter and Dylan Mitchell will come back. I do think that they need to come back and show more development at the 40 acres before they try to venture into a career in professional basketball. But, that may be wishful thinking and may be more unlikely than likely. But nonetheless, like I said, when you're going into next season, you're going to be really exciting and you have a really good outlook when your number 1 player is Tre Johnson. And he's talked about as being the best pure scorer in this class and possibly the best scorer Texas has had since Kevin Durant. Once again, a very exciting season ahead on the 40 acres for Rodney Terry and this Texas basketball program. If Tre Johnson ends up on the 40 acres. Keeping our fingers crossed, knocked on wood, because Ron Holland did us dirty. A quick word from our sponsors, and then we get into the 3-game win streak from the Texas baseball team. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is brought to you by FanDuel. The sports calendar is loaded, and FanDuel is making it even more exciting to get in on the action, because right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet the tourney, Major League Baseball, NBA, NHL, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make your first bet a big win. FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Today's episode of Locked On Longhorns is also brought to you by Amazon Fire TV. Fire TV is your destination for sports, from live games to highlights to in-depth analysis. Fire TV offers amazing viewing experiences with smart TVs, as well as the Fire TV stick that you can plug into your existing TV that provides access to millions of movies and TV episodes, as well as free and live television. Whether it's opening weekend for baseball or the college basketball tournament, you're going to want to have a Fire TV. Fire TV recently created Fire TV channels to deliver a constant supply of the latest videos from your favorite sports brands, all for free. That includes all of us at Locked On and most of the big pro leagues and college conferences as well. Fire TV channels let you dive into all of the game analysis, highlights, and more to keep up to date on all the latest in the world of sports, from March Madness, NBA, to Major League Baseball, and lots more. Not to mention great news, entertainment, gaming, travel, cooking videos as well. Check out Fire TV channels on Fire TV and Alexa devices. If you haven't checked out Fire TV channels, you should. Trust me on this. To learn more, visit www.amazon.com/lockedonfiretv. All right, so a shorter episode today, only 2 segments. This will be the last segment, but the baseball team, after a couple shaky performances, they've started to get it together, and I don't want to get too excited, because I've came out here multiple times and said this will be the win that will carry us for the rest of the season, and then they had a bad loss, immediately after that. But 3 straight victories is 3 straight victories, and now they have a chance, this weekend to win a series and continue that great run, or make it 6 in a row if they can sweep the BYU Cougars in the dish. But before we get to those 3 games, let's get to the previous 3. All right, and the Longhorns are now 18-11 on the season with a run differential of 38-15 in their last 3 victories, right? And so the Texas baseball team has outscored their last 2 opponents, right? Abilene Christian and Kansas State, in their last 3 games by 23 runs. That's really good, right? And that's the standard we're used to at the 40 acres, right? That's Texas Longhorns baseball. When you line up in front of teams that you're supposed to beat, you not only beat them, but you dominate them, right? And they did that the last 3 games, thankfully. On Saturday, Texas won 21-11. This was following a 14-6 loss on Friday, which was the first game of the series. This was following a 14-6 loss on Thursday, which was the first game of the series. I talked about it on Friday. This was a Thursday, Friday, Saturday series. I apologize. So on Friday, Texas won 21-11. And Kansas State would hit 2 solo homers in the first 2 innings, giving them a 2-0 lead. But then Texas would hit 2 separate 2-run homers in the third to take a 4-2 lead over the Kansas State Wildcats. Kansas State made it 4-3 with an RBI ground out. But in the 4th inning, Texas had an RBI double and their third 2-run homer of the game to make the score 7-3, and then got their 8th run in the 5th, scoring on a drop third strike. But unfortunately, like I said, pitching has still been inconsistent, even though the offense and defense got a little bit better over the weekend. Kansas State would tie the game at 8 apiece in the 6th inning, scoring 5 runs in that inning alone. In the top of the 7th, Texas got 3 hits and another runner reached on an error, allowing them to take an 11-8 lead. But after allowing 4 hits and 2 walks right back to Kansas State, the game was tied once again at 11. So it was tied 0-0, then it was tied 8-8, then it was tied at 11-11. So talk about a roller coaster performance. But Texas was able to, create some distance, right, or some separation. In the 8th and 9th inning, the Longhorns would outscore Kansas State 10-0, making the final score 21-11. The next game against Kansas State, and then I guess the rubber match, they beat Kansas State 6-3. Max Grubbs gave you a quality start, his second straight quality start, I believe, going 6 innings and only allowing 1 earned run, his 4th win of the season. Longhorns took the lead in the 3rd with an RBI double to go up 2-0. They would score 2 more runs in the 4th on an errant throw and a sac fly to go up 4-0. Kansas State put a ton of traffic on the bases between the 6th and the 8th innings. They had multiple opportunities to tie the game, but they can only manufacture 3 runs to show for it. So after the 8th, Texas had a 4-3 lead going into the 9th, but they created some separation for their closer with 2 back-to-back jacks from Jared Thomas and Peyton Powell to make it 6-3 before Andre Duplanter got the save. And then yesterday's game against Abilene Christian, they won 11-1. Once again, their second performance in the last 3 games where they won by 10+ runs, right? And when you go up against a team like Abilene Christian, you have to win that game, and they made sure that they won that game, right? Texas had an RBI double and single in the 1st inning to take a 2-0 lead. Abilene Christian would get their 1 run in the 2nd on a sacrifice fly, but it was all Texas after that. There was no scoring until the 5th, where 13 hitters came to the plate in the 5th inning for the Longhorns. They batted around, and Texas took a 10-1 lead, and then Jalen Flores hit his 2nd homer of the day, and I believe drove in his 5th run of the day. He had a spectacular performance yesterday in the 8th inning to make the final score 11-1. So that is how Texas not only won 3 straight games, but for the most part dominated in those 3 straight games, outside of allowing, Kansas State to tie the game in 8 and 11. Definitely the 10 runs they scored in the last 2 innings does a lot of heavy lifting in the box score on that one. But nonetheless, you'll take 3 straight victories however you can get them, and you'll definitely take 3 straight victories with a run differential of plus 23 any time of the week, any time of the season, right? Whether it's in conference play or whether it's in postseason tournament play. So really good 3-game stretch for the Texas Longhorns, and hopefully we can make it a really good 6-game stretch. Once again, they play a home series against BYU starting on Friday. So really good stuff from our Texas baseball team, really good stuff from a future superstar at the 40 acres for our basketball team and Tre Johnson last night. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Locked On Longhorns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hook 'em. Peace.